You know, when you look at how Sony has been handling live services, when you look at the culmination of their plans, it really makes you realize, man, executives should really be paid less because some of these folks really have no freaking clue what they're doing. It was only 2 years ago that Sony had the intent to launch more than 10 live service games by 2026. This number was eventually specified to be 12 live service games by 2025, as noted by this particular PowerPoint slide, where you can see right here projected numbers of SIE live service franchises by year. The plan being to start with one, the actual number that was the number of live services on fiscal year 2021. And then by fiscal year 2025, which would bleed into 2026 year-wise, that is 12 live services. This was the plan on the part of Sony executives. As if the market of live services wasn't saturated enough, the fact that one company was planning to release 12 by 2026, utterly insane. People don't have the time or money to invest in so many live services at once. That's the thing about live services, is they're each their own individual part-time to full-time jobs, and there are only so many jobs that people can do at the same time, if you will. Now, for Sony, those plans were not going as smoothly as they expected, so on November of 2023, it was reported that Sony's plan to release 12 live services by 2026 got halved to just 6. And if the latest reports are to be believed, it seems as though Sony is continuing to cancel more and more live service projects as they begin to realize just how not viable releasing so many live services is, especially with their propensity to fail. The following information was reported by investigative journalist Jason Schreier, who reported on this Bloomberg article that Sony has canceled 2 more live services. One of them that was being made by Ben Studio. That's the studio that made Days Gone. They were apparently working on a new live service game for Sony. And then the other live service that was shut down was being made by Blue Point Games, who many will recognize as the developers of the well-received Demon's Souls remake. As for what these 2 studios were working on, we don't know what Ben Studios was developing, but we do know that Blue Point, according to Jason Schreier, after the launch of Demon's Souls remake in 2020, they helped with the development of God of War Ragnarok, and then after that, Blue Point actually started development on a live service God of War game. Sony basically wants every one of their major franchises to have some kind of live service. But now we know that both of those projects have been canceled. And so if we look at the slate of Sony's live services that have been canceled, that have just gone astray, it's now a significant list. Here we have Twitter user Kami, who compiled a list of canceled PlayStation or SIE live service games in roughly the last year alone. So we have Concord, which did technically launch, but it was shut down just 2 weeks after launch, and it gave everyone refunds, no questions asked. It made 0 revenue, might as well have been canceled, you know what I mean? It really didn't have much of a life. Then we have that unannounced God of War game that Jason Schreier reported on recently. That got canceled. And then there's the Last of Us multiplayer game that I reported on some time back that also got canceled, with Naughty Dog putting out a statement saying that they want to focus on what they do best, which is single-player, campaign-driven, story-heavy experiences, which I think is the right move. There was a Spider-Man 2 multiplayer game that was also in development. I think it was called like The Great Web or something, according to the Insomniac leaks. That got canceled as well. Then there's the Ben Studio multiplayer game that Jason Schreier reported on recently. There's a Twisted Metal live service game that also got canceled. London Studios co-op game. Not only did the live service they were making get canceled, but the studio got closed down. Then there's Deviation Games multiplayer game that also got canceled, alongside this project called Payback, which was being developed by Bungie, and it was supposed to be this third-person Destiny spin-off that also got canceled. So right here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 live services that have been canceled in roughly the last year. I think it's safe to say that Sony will be hard-pressed to meet their quota of 6 live services by fiscal year 2025, and they certainly never stood a chance in releasing 12 live services by the end of fiscal year 2025. You don't have to be an executive, a CEO, or a genius, frankly, to realize that 12 live services by fiscal year 2025 was unfeasible and frankly just a stupid idea across the board. Many of those live services would not be guaranteed success, with Concord being Exhibit A, And not to mention that with so many live services from the same company, they would kind of cannibalize each other. They would be competing against each other for people's limited time and money. And I mean, looking at all of these canceled projects, it feels like such a waste of manpower, of money, of resources that could have gone to projects that are far better suited for the studios under SIE's umbrella. Here's another list by Radek that highlights how many of the live service projects that Sony Interactive Entertainment have been developing have been canceled or taken offline or shut down versus the ones that have been released. Only 3 have really released recently: Destruction All-Stars, Gran Turismo 7, and Helldivers 2, with Helldivers being one of their, if not their biggest live service success. And then the rest of them are either unannounced or TBD or canceled altogether. There are still a few things in the pipeline, like the Horizon multiplayer live service game that Guerrilla Games is working on. There's a Horizon MMO from NCSoft. There's Marathon from Bungie. There's Fair Games from Haven Studios. And then a couple unannounced things like Media Molecule's live service game, Bungie's Gummy Bears, which has been leaked to be some kind of like MOBA-esque game that Bungie is developing, according to investigative journalists and reporters. And then we have Jason Blundell's LA studio game, whatever that may end up being. But yeah, I mean, this is not a good streak. And I think part of what triggered the sudden cancellation of 2 more live services, as recently reported, is Concord's failure, which cannot be understated. We're talking about a live service that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make and made 0 revenue. The initial development deal for the game was just over $200 million, as reported here by Kotaku based on sources they spoke to. And that amount was not enough to cover the game's entire development and did not include the purchase of Concord IP rights or Firewalk Studios itself. Colin Moriarty reported that based on the sources he's spoken to, if you add everything up, Concord's cost is closer to roughly $400 million. And again, it made 0 revenue because whatever few copies Concord did manage to sell, whatever units it did manage to push, they refunded anyway. So every penny that went into the development cost of the game was just a big money sink. And you've also got journalists like Jeff Grubb reporting that based on sources that he's heard from, a big part of why some of the recent games as service cancellations have happened is because of what happened with Concord. According to him, Sony was shocked by Concord, and now they're going around to all the PlayStation studios and reevaluating every project. And if it's a games as a service, there's a lot of friction that's preventing it from having a chance to come out. Now, Sony does have a big win with Helldivers 2, which is a title that they were not expecting it to achieve the level of success that it did. But Concord basically canceled out Helldivers 2's success as a live service. Hell, I'd say Helldivers 2's success probably doesn't make up for Concord's massive failure. Someone who recently provided more insight on behind-the-scenes goings-ons at Sony Interactive Entertainment was Shuhei Yoshida, who spoke to Kind of Funny Games in a recent interview where he said the following about all of the developments surrounding live services for Sony and all of their failures and their inability to really break through in that market. He said, "What they did when I left and Herman Hulst took over is the company gave us a lot more resources. I don't think they told Herman to stop making single-player games. They said, these games are great, keep doing that, and we'll give you additional resources to work on these live service games and try it." I'm sure they knew it was risky. The chance of a game becoming successful in this hugely competitive genre would be small. However, the company, knowing that risk, gave Herman the resources and a chance to try it. I think that's the way they did it. In my mind, that's great, and hopefully some games will become successful. Luckily, Helldivers 2 did so well. Nobody expected that, so you can't plan a success in this industry. That's the most fun part of this business. I hope that this strategy will work in the end. If I was in Herman's position, probably I would have tried to resist that direction of putting so many eggs in the live service basket. Maybe that's one of the reasons they removed me from the first party, says Shuhei Yoshida. But it's one thing to make an attempt and another to be like, all right, folks, let's make 12 live services in the span of 5 years. That is just asinine stupid. Like, that is just not a reasonable plan. It's not a smart strategy. It's you gambling on something that you have very little experience with. Like, I don't understand how executives get paid the big bucks to make decisions like this, to make obvious, erroneous, misguided decisions like this. I mean, I predicted this ages ago, and I'm not the only one. Everyone could see the writing on the wall with planning something as ridiculous as 12 live services in the span of 5 years. This is just a ridiculous goal. And the ones who end up suffering for it are the developers and the talent who are following the captain, leading to layoffs and studio shutdowns that wouldn't have happened if those developers were allowed to work on something that genuinely aimed to push the boundaries of creativity rather than to push the maximization of monetization. Honestly, there's a part of me that's like Sony needed to experience a catastrophic failure like Concord to kind of wake him up a little bit. I'm not celebrating the developers who were laid off or the studio getting shut down, but sometimes it takes this kind of catastrophic disaster for a company to realize just how far astray they've gone from just any sort of sensical, logical decision making. Like, it shouldn't take a catastrophe like Concord for executives to realize that a plan like this is just completely unrealistic. But if that's what it takes, if that's what will help them course correct. I mean, the number of failures that we have seen from studios who normally specialize in single player experiences, who've then tried to make the transition to making a live service, the number of times those kinds of projects have failed, whether it's Anthem, whether it's Marvel's Avengers, whether it's Redfall, whether it's Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which I talked about not too long ago in my previous video. All of that should be indication that this course is rife with risk. And if you want to start making live services, you can't just take a bunch of single player focused development studios and just like push them into the live service genre. You got to like nurture that from the start. You got to foster that over time to a point where you've got a development studio that knows what it's doing in the realm of live services. And then you got to give them the breathing room and the creative drive to allow them to produce something that is truly unique, or something that takes something that already exists and elevates it to a new level. I just don't know what the hell they were thinking. I predicted this would happen when they first announced this, and yeah, lo and behold. And I'm no genius. Like, anyone could have seen this coming except for seemingly Sony executives. Or at the very least, that's one man's take. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on Sony's live service endeavors and some of the upcoming projects that haven't been canceled, and what you think Sony needs to do to thrive in the live service space. Or if you're like me and you would just prefer them to stick to, mostly those single player story driven campaign experiences that genuinely tend to push the boundaries and are just awesome experiences, and it's what they're good at, and they should, I think, stick to that and only expand if they're willing to do it smartly and with creative drive. Or at least that's my take. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.